This is When Science Speaks, a new web series profiling innovative and interesting people working in science and technical fields, from academia to industry to the nonprofit world. We explore how to be a powerhouse advocate for science and your research, how to advance your career in meaningful ways that make you happy, and how to push back on the ongoing assault on science and other related issues of interest happening in the world.
Well, hey everyone, it's Mark Bayer, and you are tuned to When Science Speaks. This episode of the show is sponsored by Bayer Strategic Consulting in Washington, D.C., which helps scientists get funding, gain influence, and build proven, powerful communication skills for interacting effectively with the stakeholders who matter most in their professional world. Reaching those goals often involves effective translation of complicated research into engaging, jargon-free communication that distills complex topics to capture the attention of decision makers and general audiences. Interested in getting a free resource to help you do just that? Go to complexitymadeclear.com to get the 11 keys for translating complexity. That's complexitymadeclear.com to get your free infographic used by science communicators and leaders at major organizations to boil down, dumb down, complicated science and technical topics for key stakeholders. I am so pleased to welcome Matt Krisiloff to the show today. Matt is CEO of Conception, a company working on turning pluripotent stem cells into viable human eggs. Previously, Matt was the director of Y Combinator Research, the research nonprofit of Y Combinator. He was also a founding team member of OpenAI and has worked with over 150 startups as both an investor and advisor. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
I want to start by asking you about SciFounders, the organization that you started with two of your colleagues to help technical founders launch companies. Tell us more about that vision and the why, like why the focus on technical founders, and also what you mean specifically when you refer to a technical founder, this type of leader.
Yeah. So SciFounders is an organization really with the purpose of helping more scientists start and operate companies into the long term. The goal here is really to be expanding the idea that scientists can actually be really great startup founders, because I don't think that idea has really percolated widely enough at this point. So many scientists still to this day really think, hey, I can go in academia, I can start my professorship and have my own laboratory in academia, or I can go work for someone in industry. But actually, it's a really powerful idea to end up combining those two and work on translating the types of research that you're working on towards the end of actually being able to have the impact that can only come in the form of a company that really succeeds in the sense of financial resources, team coordination, where you can have many scientists working together on a very difficult problem. So that was something that in the last 20 years, we've seen spread a lot more widely amongst other areas of technical work. Think software engineers that in the last 20 years have gone on to start really impactful software and web companies. But that same thing amongst life scientists is not quite percolated widely enough yet. And so wanting to help catalyze that event to occur as soon as possible.
Really interesting. You talked about scientists in industry. You recently wrote that it's a good time for scientists in industry to start companies. And of course, we're going to have a link to your blog post in the show notes that accompany this episode. But I want to focus on scientists, founders coming from academia, actually. In your experience, what have been the positives of involving scientists as founders? And then what have been areas for development that you've noticed when working with founders that are coming from a university setting?
Yeah. The great thing about working with founders that are technical is they really care about the science, right? That's what's really motivating them. They are doing this for the actual technology development and for that long-term potential that this could have a massive impact on people's lives if whatever they're researching ends up having a proper impact. And that is a very unique, differentiating thing compared to a lot of people that go into business, a lot of people that go into startups that end up primarily being motivated for the money factor. And while the money factor is not something to ignore and still can be an excellent second order effect to something really succeeding, I'm a firm believer that a lot of the most impactful companies and technologies as they've been developed in this type of startup and company route have actually had that engineering and the development of the science as the prime motivator at their core. And so that's probably the most powerful thing that the scientist technical founders can bring to it, is that deep understanding and keeping of that company culture core all around the technology. The flip side, though, is of course, for a lot of scientists, especially the ones we work with that are primarily graduate students that have recently completed a PhD, or postdocs that are leaving academia for the first time, a lot of these folks do not have their business experience to really know what to be looking for, how to be bringing a team together, how to be raising funding, things along those lines. So what we end up doing with SciFounders is helping those types of people become really great founders, so they can not only do the technical parts, which actually, in my opinion, over the long term ends up being harder than learning the soft skill parts, but for the right ones with the aptitude to learn the soft skill parts, we can help them really come up to speed. I will caveat and say, not every scientist by any means should be starting a startup. There's a lot of scientists out there that it's not the right pathway for them. They're maybe doing something research wise that doesn't make sense in a company context, or they might be working on something that just won't be well suited with their own personal soft skill set to really be able to bring that into the fruition to have that type of greater impact. But for the scientists that do have that intersection of working on something technically interesting and can grow into being really excellent leaders, I really believe it's one of the most powerful social organizational tools one can do in terms of pushing the technology they're passionate about forward.
So true. And you mentioned the soft skills, some of these communication skills, negotiation skills, emotional intelligence, for example. If I'm a scientist listening, I'm affiliated with a university, and I'm thinking about starting my first company, say, what steps should I take to better inform and position myself to succeed as a founder? Resources, training, things like that.
One of the really important things is actually having someone to work with. It's not strictly a necessity. There are plenty of people that do start companies and succeed as solo founders, so to speak. But a startup is a really hard thing with a lot of responsibilities going on at any given time. And it's also, especially for these hard science companies that scientists tend to start that have much longer time frames, it can be a super isolating and lonely process as well, to be just working on experiments that take months and months in terms of an iteration cycle, and you don't know if they're going to work out, and you have the stress of not knowing if you're going to have the funding resources to keep advancing the technology you're going to be working on early on. It really helps to have someone that can complement your skill sets and help you stay motivated, and you can be there for each other in a way that really positively contributes to the overall experience. So definitely one thing I would recommend for scientists listening is think about the people that you've already worked with or might be around or be friends with that you could work well together. It doesn't have to be a technical person per se. Like with my company, actually, Conception, the pluripotent stem cell to egg cell company, I'm actually non-technical. I'm very fortunate that as a founding team, it's me and two co-founders that are both reproductive biologist PhDs. And together, the three of us really round out to be like an excellent leadership. But any of us individually, it'd be a lot harder to be doing that and having all of the pieces. So having someone that can complement you, I think, is probably the number one recommendation I can give if you're thinking about working on something to actually be able to pursue it properly.
Thanks for that. I don't think that's really obvious to a lot of people, is finding that colleague or colleagues. So thanks, Matt, for mentioning that. And of course, SciFounders also runs its own mentoring program for idea stage founders. What can you tell us about the program?
Yeah, so SciFounders is primarily organized around a fellowship program called SciFounder Fellowship, where we give $400,000 plus mentorship to teams that are just starting out on their companies. Anywhere ranging from a half-baked idea to maybe there's a small set of prototype experiments that have been run, but it's very early on. And primarily, as I mentioned, for people that are, say, recent PhD graduates or postdocs that are really going about this for the first time. And so along with the money, which I think is a really important enabling factor for these types of companies, because just frankly, these types of experiments that you would want to be doing with a company do cost money. The other really significant thing is the mentorship that we provide. Because me and along with my two other partners, Lucas and Alex, all of us have experience very actively right now operating startups. I have Conception. Alex works with Conception on me as well. And then Lucas actually co-founded Mammoth Biosciences, which is one of the major CRISPR companies that got started out of Jennifer Doudna's lab. So together, we have a lot of experience about what it's actually like going through the process of starting a company. And a lot of the lessons end up being non-intuitive in terms of what we're able to pass on to the early career people that are giving this a try for the first time. Being part of the fellowship program really can catalyze this development speed for people to become really excellent founders. As we've seen now for the last year and a half, we've been doing this as we've funded 8 teams to this point. The other thing we do as well with SciFounders is also fund startups that are a little bit further along, still led by technical teams working on deeply technical problems. And this as well is coming from the perspective that we think we have a lot of learnings that we can help share with founders that still might be doing this for the first time or even might be doing it a second or third time, but type of deep technology companies are very unique experiences. And so we think we can still be helpful as well and have been seeing that too.
Yeah, really interesting. How did you and Alexander and Lucas come together to start SciFounder?
Yeah. So Alex, his wife is my co-founder for Conception. Yeah. Knew each other from that way in terms of, yeah, just being in similar work and social circles going back to the start. And then Lucas and I, we'd known each other for a long time and had been talking about these types of problems as something that scientists really could benefit from in terms of having more resources for translating that experience from an academic environment into an industry world where they're really leaders. Both of us had been talking about this could be a really valuable, important thing to get started. So just coalesced on that in terms of teaming up for it.
Yeah. I wanted to also point out about SciFounders, the description of the type of founder who might be a good fit is someone who's able to communicate with the technical team. And we've been talking about the importance of communication and the ability to translate, of course, translate your research, but also translate descriptions of your work, scientists, for example. How important is it to have this ability to communicate both with the technical team, and also with external stakeholders who are unfamiliar with the team's technology, like potential funders, for example?
Yeah, it's a super important skill set to have on your team, the ability to very effectively communicate. This is as well an area where it's not that everyone on the leadership team necessarily needs to have that great communication ability, both internal and external, but combined together, you definitely need to be able to cover all bases. On the external aspects, you really need to be ready to be asking people for support, right? This is a thing where you need to be raising outside funding from others. You need to constantly be convincing other scientists and other people to join your team to build out your vision, that what you're working on is worth their time, that outside of personal family life, this might be the thing that other people you recruit on your team spend the most of their waking hours on. And so you really need to be an effective leader in that sense, in terms of being able to pull other people in to achieve this vision of whatever it is you set out to do. And then on the internal side, it's somewhat less of an issue when you're first starting out and there's only a couple of people. But as you start to have more people, as you're having more success, communication across the organization becomes a really important thing in terms of making sure people are focused on the right thing. I'd say focus is one of the biggest aspects that ends up killing a startup if people are unfocused or focusing on the wrong things. So there needs to be a good trickling of information across everyone in the organization, so everyone really knows their purpose about what they're working on and has the opportunity to really in a firsthand way be able to see, hey, I fit into this greater machine in terms of working on this piece that's very important. And I see exactly how that works. And then, of course, just as a company culture as well, it's important that people communicate well with each other so there's not friction, people get along well, and cohesively as a team, everyone can work effectively towards the same end. To put it simply, I think communication is one of the most important things to do well in a startup.
Thanks for that, Matt. You and Lucas and Alex are doing really meaningful work in your own right outside of SciFounders. And within SciFounders, so you also have a portfolio of companies. Would you like to give us some highlights on the types of work that your portfolio companies are involved in?
Yeah, it's a really great set of teams and scientists we've been fortunate enough to be able to fund, be working on their visions at this point. It's hard to just pick out a few, not describe everyone, but maybe a couple that I think are working on really cool things. One is this company, Current Surgical. This is a company that's developing an ultrasonic needle that can be used for cancer treatments and for all sorts of other conditions where instead of having to cut with a scalpel, it's like a needle with an ultrasonic probe on it where, say you're looking for a solid tumor, you could insert it, find where the tumor is, and then still using the ultrasonic waves, burn out that tumor. So much more precisely, you can actually eliminate a diseased tissue. You can use it for diagnosing things more effectively. And for the right conditions, it's much more minimally invasive as well. And background wise, the two founders that are working on this are people that have been in the medical device world for many years, but they're engineers and scientists first. And they're exactly the types I think that can go on to build something here that could be very impactful. Another company that we've funded is called MT, which is working on free methods for gene therapies to be able to more effectively get to the right cells to treat all sorts of diseases. One of the hardest things right now with gene therapies is actually being able to get to the right cells for whatever you're trying to change. It's quite common that if you deliver a gene therapy into the body, there will be off-target effects where it'll end up targeting the wrong cells and cause all sorts of negative effects. But they're working on next generation lipid nanoparticles, which are very similar to what was used in the mRNA vaccines for COVID, which people are much more familiar with at this point. But using those lipid nanoparticles to more precisely target the right cells so the gene therapies into the right place. And that overall, if it ends up working out, could be like a really big deal for the cell therapy and gene therapy field. Be one other one just to highlight quickly is a company called Luminate, which is working on anti-cancer support products to really make cancer treatment a much more palatable experience. And their prime product that they've started with is a helmet for chemotherapy patients that you put on after having a chemotherapy infusion. And using magnet technology, it makes it your hair follicles are not exposed to the chemotoxins. And so you don't end up having the hair loss effects that would normally happen with chemotherapy. This team as well started by a very bright young scientist, engineer founder, and his co-founder as well, who've been working generally in this type of space. And I think what they're going to accomplish, what all three of these teams I just highlighted amongst others could potentially accomplish, could be huge in terms of what they can do for human health. So these are just the types of examples where, compared to a software company where it's a calendar application or some mobile app widget, like the types of impacts that these scientists working on these important technologies can have is just huge. And that's what makes me so excited about supporting these types of teams and really nurturing them. They have that chance of reaching that momentum point where they can really have such a significant impact on so many people.
Really impactful. Thanks for sharing that, Matt. We're talking right now in December of 2022, almost the end of the year here. And I'm wondering, as you look to next year and beyond, some of the professional goals that you might have, both for SciFounders and the other companies that you're involved with.
We are closing our 2022 application cycle for SciFounder Fellowship. That's actually happening this week as we're recording it right now, this Wednesday, December 15th. We get a massive deluge of applications in and we review them all. And it's a really fun and busy time because we're getting to meet with so many different potential scientist founders that want to get started with this type of thing. So really just focused in my partners on getting through that at this point. I guess I'll say a plug as well for anyone listening. Even I think by the time this airs, we'll probably be past our application deadline. But if there's anyone listening that does want to apply, definitely reach out on SciFounders.com. And yeah, we're happy to give you an extension to fill out the simple application to be able to do that still. Going into next year with SciFounders, hoping to really be able to ramp up and potentially raise new funding for us to even further be able to support more companies in terms of the type of work we're doing. Because yeah, I think there's a lot of ways to keep growing and expanding the ambition of what SciFounders is trying to accomplish. And I think it's really important that we keep pushing on this because frankly, outside of us and a couple other groups, there's not enough people that are trying to promote this aspect specifically at this point. I think there's more work to still be done.
Absolutely. Matt, thanks to you, thanks to Lucas, thanks to Alex, who are doing this high impact work that can make such a difference all across the world. So thank you for that work that you are all involved in. And of course, also within SciFounders, and then the work that you're doing in your various other enterprises. It's really meaningful work. Thanks for that. And thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, very fun to talk about this.
Listeners, thank you for being with us on this episode of When Science Speaks. And I hope you'll be back next time for the next episode of When Science Speaks.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to click subscribe. Check us out on the web at whensciencespeaks.com, and we'll see you next time.